Hey all, in this video we're going to be talking about government intervention. This is going to be a two-part video. In this video we're going to be looking at just government intervention as a whole. We're going to be looking at price controls and efficiency. A joke. What is the coldest letter in the alphabet? It's the letter B because it's in between AC. Alright, so this is the first video of two for the effects of government intervention, as you guys know from the intro. And so more specifically, we're going to go over price controls and efficiency. So with price controls, there are really two different types. There's going to be a price ceiling and a price floor. So what a price ceiling is, it's the maximum legal price a seller can charge for a product. And so this is not just based off the free market, right? Remember, the title of this sort of Google slide is going to be Effects of Government Intervention. And so with any sort of price control, whether it be a price ceiling or a price floor or taxes, as we're going to get into in the next video, it's always the government intervening or any sort of government action, right, taken to sort of remedy a problem. So a price ceiling is when the government comes in and says, this is the maximum price you can sell this good. And the point of this is to make goods affordable, right, by keeping prices from reaching equilibrium. And so here, an example of this will be sort of rent, right? Rent control, right, is an example of a price ceiling. If rent is way too high, right, the government is going to step in and say, well, the equilibrium rent price is way too high. So we're going to say, this is the maximum price you can charge for rent here. And so on our graph, what does this look like? Well, you know, we have price, we have quantity, we have our upward sloping supply and our downward sloping demand curve. And then where they intersect is our equilibrium price and quantity. And so here, right, this equilibrium price, if there is a price ceiling imposed, it is too high. And so like we talked about on the last slide, the goal of a price ceiling is to prevent prices from becoming too expensive. And so our price ceiling to be binding, or in other words, to be effective, always has to be placed below equilibrium. So this is going to be our price ceiling. And so this represents our new, this should be a C. This represents our new price here. So now all of a sudden, right, this equilibrium price doesn't really exist, right? Because we're not going to where supply meets demand. Instead, we're going to this price ceiling that's placed below equilibrium. But whenever there's a price ceiling placed, right, this is going to be our quantity demanded, this is our quantity supplied. And so here, our quantity demanded is greater than our quantity supplied, which means there is a shortage of goods. So whenever there's a price ceiling placed, yes, goods become less expensive, but it causes a shortage of goods. So it's both good and bad, right? It's good for consumers because of the fact that we're not paying as much for this particular good or service, but at the same time, there's going to be a shortage of goods here. The second price control is a price floor, which is basically the exact opposite of a price ceiling. If the goal of a price ceiling is to prevent price from going too high, the goal of a price floor is to keep prices from going too low, right? So it's the minimum legal price a seller can sell its product. And so here, right, an example would be during the Great Depression. During the Great Depression, the government set up price floors on agricultural goods, on crops. Right? Why? Well, if the government kept the price of crops artificially high through a price floor, that meant farmers were incentivized to grow more crops because they're going to be paid more for their goods. And so what does this exactly look like on our graph here? Right? So yet again, just like always, price, quantity, upward sloping supply, downward sloping demand, and then where they meet is our equilibrium price. And so our price floor, right, we'll do this in green here, is only effective when it is placed above equilibrium. Because remember, a price floor is designed so that prices don't fall to equilibrium. We want to keep, or the government wants to keep prices artificially high here. And so just like the price ceiling, right, this equilibrium price doesn't exist because this price floor, when implemented, prevents price from dropping to that equilibrium price there. And so now prices are higher than the equilibrium. But there's a problem, right? This right here is our quantity demanded. This right here is our quantity supplied. So our quantity supplied is greater than our quantity demanded, which causes a surplus of goods here. So this is good for producers, right? Because producers are now charging more, right, for their good. But at the same time, it causes a surplus of goods. So oftentimes what the government is going to do when they step in and implement a price floor is they're going to buy the surplus of goods there. Right? So during our Great Depression example, when the government instituted a price floor to keep crop prices artificially high to incentivize farmers to grow more crops, there was a surplus of crops. So the government stepped in, bought all those crops from the farmers, or the surplus of crops from the farmers, right? To keep farmers incentivized to keep on producing those goods. And so here, right, this leads us to efficiency. And so, are they good or bad? Well, we talked about in the past two examples with price floor and price ceilings, they are both good and bad, right? Well, here, right, another reason why price controls are bad is because they cause inefficiencies in the market. So if we just look at a normal supply and demand curve, right, here's our quantity and here's our price. The reason why, let's put this all this way and all this way. So the reason why, right, the equilibrium price and just a normal supply and demand curve, right, the reason why we want to go there, or the reason why we're going to say it's efficient is because it maximizes consumer and producer surplus. Remember, consumer surplus is anything above the equilibrium or the equilibrium price and below the demand curve. So essentially, what's marked in red is going to be our consumer surplus. And if you notice, we're maximizing consumer surplus. So it's going all the way out to equilibrium here. And so the reason why it's below is because there are some consumers that are willing to pay this high price right here. But they're actually paying that price? No, they're paying at this equilibrium price down here. And then so on, there's people willing to pay at this point, this point, this point, this point, all the way down to equilibrium. But none of them are paying their buyer's max. Instead, all of them are paying the equilibrium price. The same is true for producer surplus, right? Producer surplus is anything below equilibrium price and above the supply curve. So what's in blue right here? So the equilibrium price for producers represents the price they're selling their goods at. Are there producers willing to sell their good at a much lower price? Yes. Are they? No, because they're going to sell their good at the equilibrium price and so on and so on and so on all the way out to equilibrium. So if you notice, right, we are maximizing both consumer and producer surplus, which we're going to say is a very efficient market. However, when there are price controls, right, this example, let's say there is a price floor, supply, demand, quantity, and price, right? Let's say there's a price floor. Remember, with the price floor, it needs to be placed above equilibrium to be effective. And so here, this price floor represents the new price. No longer does this equilibrium price exist because the price floor's goal is to prevent prices from dropping that low. And so that changes our consumer and producer surplus, right? At this price right here, right, this represents how much consumers are demanding. And so this in red is our new consumer surplus. So if you notice, it shrank because consumers are paying a higher price. And then in blue, right, this sort of quadrilateral shape, right, represents our producer surplus. And so here, this price floor caused inefficiency in the market. We're no longer maximizing both consumer and producer surplus. So where on this graph is the inefficiency? Well, the inefficiency is this triangle in green right here, right? All the way out to equilibrium. So this is inefficient, or it represents the area of inefficiency. Or we're also going to call it deadweight loss. So to make it easier, anytime the government gets involved, whether it's a price ceiling, price floor, or in the next video when we're talking about taxes, there has to be some form of deadweight loss. There is going to be inefficiency. The only time when there isn't inefficiency or there is no deadweight loss is when we rely on the free market, right? When we go to where supply and demand intersect and we go to the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. And so we'll just leave off with where is the inefficiency in a price ceiling, right? This is the last thing that we'll do here. So yet again, price, quantity, supply, demand, quantity equilibrium, price equilibrium. So we said a price ceiling is only effective if it's placed below equilibrium. So here is our price ceiling, which represents our new price. So yet again, this equilibrium goes away. And so here, right, our producer surplus is anything below the price and above the supply curve. So this triangle right here, right, represents the area of producer surplus. Well, here, right, this quadrilateral shape right here is the area of our consumer surplus, which should make sense, right? Our consumer surplus should get bigger because the price is now lower. And our producer surplus should get smaller because producers aren't bringing as much home because of the lower price point. But where's the deadweight loss? Well, the deadweight loss, yet again, is this triangle right here, right? In other words, this, like I said, represents the area of inefficiency. All right, so I hope you guys learned a lot. We do have some practice AP questions, and there's going to be another video that goes over more in depth and explains these different practice AP questions here. So I hope you guys learned a lot, and I'll catch you in the next video. Peace.